Okay, so now you just factor what's in here. Okay, so if you have, I'll pull that over to the side, x squared minus 8x minus 20, you just have to find two numbers. Well, you know your c is equal to negative 20, and your b is equal to negative 8. You just have to find two numbers that multiply to equal your c, and those same two numbers add to equal your b. Now this is where it can get a little bit tricky. Yes?
Is it negative 10 and 2?
Yep, negative 10 and 2. Because you get different combinations of positive and negative, so you want to kind of look at that. Okay, so that means this, we just become x minus 10, x plus 2. Okay, so once you get that, it will become, don't forget your 3, x minus 10 times x plus 2. Make sure that's up enough. Yep. All right, so any questions on that one? All right. Okay. Okay, so now we want to factor trinomials in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. This is when you have something in front of the x squared other than 1. Okay. And this is called the a times c method. Okay, so your steps, your first step is you want to factor out a greatest common factor if possible, because you want this a and the c to be as small as you can. So if you can factor, let's say if you had a 25 here and a 50 there, if you had to multiply 25 and 50 and then find two numbers, it's really hard to work with that. But if you can factor out a 25 or 5, it will make it a little bit easier. Okay, so first thing you want to do, factor out the greatest common factor. That's only if it's possible. Most of the time it's not, or you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so your second step to find two values that multiply to equal a times c. Before, we just found two values that multiply to equal c. This time, we want to find two values that multiply to equal a times c. And add to equal b. Okay. Now your third step, you're going to replace b times x in your original, well, I guess you could say original trinomial, with the two values from step 2. Okay. Now your fourth step, the factor by grouping we did before, that's what you're going to do for your fourth step. Because now you just turned, clean that up a little bit, 3 terms into 4 terms. So once you turn it into 4 terms, you can now factor by grouping. Give everyone a chance to finish writing that. Right. Okay, so for example, let's say if we wanted to factor 8x squared minus 14x plus 5. Okay, so you can't factor anything out. They don't have anything in common. They don't have 2's in commons, 4's in commons, anything like that. So there's no greatest common factor. Okay, so your second step, you know that A is equal to 8, B is equal to negative 14, and C is equal to 5. Because you remember, it's just in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And we know that a times c is equal to 8 times 5, which is 40. Okay. So that means we have to find 2 numbers that multiply to equal 40, but then add together to equal our b, which is negative 14. So 2 numbers that multiply to equal 40, and those same 2 numbers add to equal negative 14. Any ideas?
Negative 4, negative 10.
Yep, negative 4, negative 10. Okay, now we have our 2 numbers. Our third step is we're going to replace our negative 14x with those 2. Okay, so that means 8x squared minus 14x plus 5 will now become 8x squared. That just breaks down to negative 4x minus 10x. So all you did was get the same number and break it down. Plus 5. Okay, so now we have our 4 terms. And remember, with 4 terms, you can use factor by grouping. Okay, so remember the steps for factoring by grouping. 8x squared minus 4x minus 10x plus 5. You're going to break that down to 2 smaller groups. Then you're going to find the greatest common factor of each of those smaller groups. Okay, so here, you can make that 2 times 4 times x minus 4 times x. Okay, so we just got the first group and broke it down. Minus 2 times 5 times x plus 5. Oh, bring that up a little bit. Okay. So here we know we can factor out a 4 and we can factor out an x. Okay, that leaves us with 2 times x. And when everything factors out, remember a 1 goes there. You can always distribute it, should put you right back where you started. Okay, here we can factor out a 5. And we can also factor out a -1, because remember, we want these two to match. So if you factor out a -1, that will turn that negative. So we can make that a -5 instead of 5. Okay, which will change that -2x to positive 2x, and that +1 to -1. And remember, you can always distribute, and it should put you right back where you started. So you can always double check it before you go any further. Okay, so just like we want it, we have our matching binomials, which means once they match, we can pull them right out. Okay, so we factored those out, and what's left goes inside the other parentheses, 4x and the -5. Okay, so if you do the FOIL method, you'll find you'll end up right back to your original problem. All right, so any questions on this one? Oh, this method is really lengthy, which is why, let's see, where's the example I use? If you look at this previous example, that's why, if possible, you want to factor it out. Because if you can factor it out and use this method, it's a lot easier than using the A times C. That's why you always want to double check and see if you can factor out something first, just to make it easier. Because if we use the A times C on the previous one, we'd get the same answer, just a lot more work. Okay. Any questions on this one? All right. Everyone done writing? Oh, still writing. Okay. Let's do another example. Want to factor 2x squared plus 13x plus 6. Okay. Now, if there's a way to get rid of that 2, we could factor 2 out of 6, but with 13, you can't have 2 times anything equals 13, so you're kind of stuck with that one. Unless you want to start messing around with fractions, but I don't think you want to do that. It'll make it a really troubling looking problem. Okay, so we know there's no greatest common factor, so we can't simplify that one. Okay, so remember your second step, you know that A is equal to 2. We know that B is equal to 13. And we know that C is equal to 6. So that means our A times C is equal to 2 times 6, which is 12. Okay. So that means we have to find two numbers that multiply to equal your a times c, and those same two numbers add to equal your b, which is 13. Okay. Any ideas?
12 and 1.
Yep, 12 and 1. So you have 12 times 1 is 12, and 12 plus 1 is 13. Up just enough. Okay. Okay. So your third step, you're going to take those two numbers and replace the 13x. Make sure it's not that too far. Okay, so replace your bx. Okay, so that means 2x squared plus 13x plus 6 will become 2x squared plus 12x plus 1x plus 6. Okay. Then from there, it's just factor by grouping. Okay, so that means we have to get our 2x squared plus 12x. You can put plus x or 1x. It kind of depends on what you're comfortable with. Plus 6. Okay, so we know the first step in factoring by grouping is you have to break it down to two smaller groups, and then find the greatest common factor of those two groups. Okay, so that means we can make this 2 times x times x. Oops, clean it a little bit more. Plus 12x, we can make that 2 times 6 times x. And draw a little arrow there. Plus 1 times x, you can't really do much else with that except 1 times x, so. Or if you just wanted to make it x, you could do that. Plus 6, or you can make it 6 times 1 if you like. Okay, I'll do that for this one just to show how adding the 1 may help a little bit. Okay, so we know for this one, you can factor out a 2 and an x from both of those. And what's left goes in the parentheses, x plus 6. Plus, now for this one, you can factor a 1 out of both of those, which is why sometimes it helps to make it 1 times x and 1 times whatever. And that leaves you with x plus 6. Okay, so we have the matching binomials that we were looking for. As long as those match, we know we're on the right track. Okay, so you just get those, factor them out to the front. And as soon as you factor them out, you just cross them out. And that leaves you with 2x plus 1. All right, and that's your final answer. All right, any questions on that one? All right, so as long as you get the steps down, it usually helps a bit. All right. Let's get one more example up here. So if we wanted to factor 3x squared plus 11x plus 6. Okay, and I'll give you a few minutes to start on this one. Let me stop that.